All right, we are going to find x and y intercepts today. And this is an alternate way for graphing lines where you don't have to rearrange. So in the previous lesson that we did on graphing lines when they're in standard form like this, where you have the x and the y over here, we solved for the y. We added or subtracted the x term. We divided by the coefficient of y. That's how we did it. This is an alternate way to graph lines, and it also helps us find where the line crosses the x and the y-axis, which in story problems later on is going to be important. What you learn today will work for other functions that are not lines as well. So some of this is going to carry on into when we do our parabolas later in the semester. All right, so on number 1, here's your process. We are going to put zeros in for x and for y, because when you cross the x-axis and the y-axis, one of your coordinates is 0. So I'm going to start by making the y-coordinate 0. So I'm going to rewrite this, taking y out and putting 0 in. So what that does is that gets rid of this part entirely, and I have x equals -1. That is our x-intercept, which means that is where my line's going to cross the x-axis. So I can go ahead and put a point at -1 on the x-axis, and that is part of my line. Yes?
Why did you change the y instead of the x?
We're going to do the x also. We're going to do both of them. So now I'm going to put 0 in where the x is. So I'll have 0 minus y equals -1. So that 0 part just goes away. You get -y equals -1. How do I get that to just be y? Yeah, divide by the -1. Because this actually would be -1y. And so then I get y equals 1. And that would be my y-intercept. And so that's where it's going to cross the y-axis. So I can put a point up here at 1. And if you have 2 points, that's all I excuse me. all I need to know where my line goes. Because I have my y-intercept, I can see what my slope is. It goes up 1 over 1. And if I wanted to, I could continue that pattern out to get more of my line. And then I can draw it in. And I should have grabbed a ruler, but I forgot. So we're just going to try to freehand this neatly. So if I have where it crosses the x and y axis, and it is a straight line, you have all the information you need to get as much of the line as you want. And it's a way to do this without having to rearrange the equation, which is kind of cool. Now, on some equations, your points are going to be so close together, and they may not be whole numbers, and it gets a little weird. But it's still a good skill to know. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at example number 2. So on number 2, let's start by putting 0 in for y. You can start with whatever one you want. It doesn't matter. So I have 2x plus 0 equals 2. If you wanted to save some writing, you could skip the plus 0 and just leave it off. And you could skip straight to 2x equals 2. And then we would solve for x. So how would I get x by itself? Divide by 2. Good. And so I'll get x equals 1. And you don't have to label it every time because it has an x on it. We know that that one's the x-intercept. So on my x-axis, then I would have a point at 1. Question? No. Okay. So that's where this point goes. So then if I go and put 0 in for x, I would have 2 times 0 plus y equals 2. And you can tell 2 times 0 is just going to be 0.
Whoa.
So you could, in theory, just leave that part out and skip all the way to y equals 2. You could actually, it's just like covering that part up. When I put 0 in there, that whole term disappears. I just have y equals 2. And so that means on the y-axis, I'm going to go through 2.
So in other words, you could just skip the entire part where
yeah, I'm going to go ahead and do it, and that's mostly because later on, when we do the more complicated equations, you will have to do a little bit more finagling. But that's basically it. So if I wanted to, I have 2 points. I could just draw it like this, and put an arrow on both ends, or I could see that it's going down 2 over 1 and I could continue it a couple more times if I wanted to. It just depends on what you need out of this graph. If we were trying to figure out where 2 lines crossed, I might want to take it all the way out to the edges. I would say let's try to get at least 3 points if we can. And then put your arrows on there to show that it keeps going. Okay, so let's go down to number 3. So I'm going to keep putting the zeros in just to emphasize why it works. So I'm going to put 0 in for y first, just because I like to do that. So I'd have x minus 2 times 0 equals 4. So this part, we take 2 times 0 is just going to be 0. So it's just x minus 0 equals 4. So that whole part just goes away. You get x equals 4. So that's my x-intercept. I have to make sure I'm on the x-axis. There's a point at 4. Then I can do the same thing by putting 0 in for x. So where that x is, I'll put in a 0. 0 minus 2y equals 4. So that 0 part just goes away. Negative 2y equals 4. And then I still have to solve for y. So we divide by negative 2. Good job. That cancels this out. We get y equals negative 2. So when you have a positive divided by a negative or negative divided by positive, your answer comes out negative. So y equals negative 2 is down here. So if I connected these, I can kind of see there's actually a point in here where it crosses as well. And I could use that to make more points, continue this out as far as I want. For your assignment, let's try to get at least 3 points. Okay? Just to show me that you know how to use this to continue. Okay, number 4.
Question?
Yes,
Do
question.
you have to do x first, or does it matter?
It doesn't matter as long as you do them both. The one that says x goes on the x-axis, the one that says y goes on the y-axis, so it does not matter which one you do first. So I like to put 0 in for the y and do the x first, but that's just because that's how I was taught. Okay, so on the next one, I'm going to put 0 in for y first. So x minus 5 times 0 equals negative 5. So this whole part just becomes 0. It'd just be x minus 0. And the 0 goes away, and I get x equals negative 5. So lucky me, I didn't have to really solve anything. I just had to put the 0 in and do the math. So x equals negative 5 would be over here. Make sure if you solve for x that you're on the x-axis. Then I'll put 0 in for the x. So I'll have 0 minus 5y equals negative 5. That 0 goes away. So negative 5y equals negative 5. And you're right. Next, we're going to divide by negative 5. So you get y equals 1. So up here on this, I'm going to have 1. So if I look, this goes up 1 over 5. So I could go up 1 over 5 to just get 1 more point. And I just barely get the 3 points that we want. But that's okay. And then we draw the line. We should use a ruler. I forgot mine. And we put the arrows on the ends. Okay? Now, the next two are rearranged a little differently. They're not in standard form, but that's just to show you this works for any form. Yes? Yes.
Can you?
Okay, number 5. So let's put 0 in for the y first. So I would have 3x equals negative 12 plus 6 times 0. Okay? So this part just becomes 0, and I would get 3x equals negative 12, because that's just going to go away. So even though on most of them we didn't have to solve, because this is arranged a little differently, we will have to solve.
Divide by 3?
Yep. So you divide by 3, we get x equals negative 4. So we'll go to negative 4 on the x-axis. And then you still do the same thing and put 0 in for x. So we'll have 3 times 0 equals negative 12 plus 6y. It's just that this time it's a little different because 3 times 0 is 0, and that's on the other side of the equation. So there's going to be quite a bit to solving this one. So I need to get y by itself. Do I add or subtract first, or do I divide by the 6 first?
Subtract. Subtract.
I'm getting all kinds of answers. When you're solving an equation, you want to add and subtract first. So plus 12, And so you get 12 equals 6y,
But you.
and then you divide.
Yeah, y equals 2, bro.
Because if you divided first, you'd have to,
What happened to 3?
3 times 0 is 0.
There's
Okay.
X.
Okay, so then 12 divided by 6 is what? 2, good job, equals y. And so my y is at 2. Okay, so to go from this point to this point, I'm going up 2 and over 4, so I could do that again, up 2 and over 4. You will also notice there's going to be some points on the grid in between that you could mark. I could mark this point and this point as well. It's actually going up 1 over 2 if we actually look at it closely. Okay? So if they're not in that standard form, it's a little bit more solving when you put in these zeros, but you're still just putting the 0 in for x, putting the 0 in for y, and solving for that variable, just like we've been doing with solving equations. Okay? You ready for number 6?
Yes.
Okay, so on number 6, it's actually slope-intercept form, almost. But I'm going to go ahead and show you that this method works for this too. So I'm going to put 0 in for y first. So 0 equals 5 minus x. Now, usually we leave the x alone when we're solving for it, but on this one, if we add x to both sides, that'll make this really easy, and we'll just get x equals 5. You could also subtract the 5 and then divide by -1. You'll still get 5 if that makes you more comfortable. You can do that. And so x equals 5 is right here. And then we'll put 0 in for x. So I'll have y equals 5 minus 0. Just pretty easy. It's just y equals 5. So we'll go up, and there's my point right there. And on this one,
between it.
yeah, on this one, it looks at first like I'm not going to get other points. But if I connect these, I notice that the slope is actually -1. It's actually going down 1, right 1, down 1, right 1. And you could actually mark some other points in here. Okay, that's it.